reference.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the echo chamber?
So I think kind of my understanding is, in terms of what you're looking at, is the phenomenon of, particularly, hey there, particularly when we talk about politics, oftentimes we're talking to people that share our views, and we're really being kind of reinforced as opposed to exploring new views. And it tends to be polarizing. And I mean, I think there are political scientists who believe that we're more polarized right now than we were 20 or 50 years ago, and that there's some pretty real consequences to that, not the least of which is that people kind of hate each other. And I think people agreed to disagree a little more in the past, and now I think people tend to feel like folks who have different political views than them are bad people or evil people.
What do you think particularly causes that polarization?
Well, I think a few that I've sort of read about, one is sort of social media and the nature of that our sort of feeds are really personalized to us, both because, for instance, with Facebook, we're choosing who we are friends with, but also news organizations want to sell more news. They want to sell more ads, and so they're going to do their best to, if I search for a certain, topic, they're going to feed me more of that stuff. And so we really are kind of, I think, getting kind of isolated, and we're not hanging out digitally with folks and with content that challenges what we already believe. And there's a phenomenon called group polarization, which you could look up, which is that what they've found is if you get people together and you have like-minded people together and you have them talk about an issue that they feel strongly about, they will feel more strongly after an hour of conversation than they did before that hour. So you get people, a famous study was they got college students together who were one group I think they labeled as racist, and the other group they labeled as non-racist. Well, after an hour, they gave them a survey. Halima, did you need a copy of something?
No, I just come here to let you know that I put everything there.
Oh, good, okay,
It's
good.
not ready yet, so to say.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll get stuff graded. It's been with the psychology fair. It's been kind of a crazy week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then I need for the vocabulary thingy.
What about it?
I need the presentation for that.
It's uploaded. It's in Synergy. I just uploaded the last one, the Asian Americans.
Oh.
Yeah, that one's in. Yeah, and if you can't get it on your phone, pull it up on that computer over there. And let me know if you have any trouble, if you get stuck at all. But anyway, it's fascinating. After an hour together, the group that was non-racist, they're even more non-racist. The group that was already racist, they become more racist. And I think we're doing a lot of that, digitally. And, and I think, yeah.
While researching, there was a large connection between confirmation bias and echo chambers. Do you think there's like a large difference between them, or?
Well, I think they're different concepts, but I think that part of what's happening in an echo chamber is confirmation bias, that you are looking for information that supports what you already believe. It's a weird time, too. I mean, in terms of news, these are just my own thoughts, my own opinions, but I think, our president talks a lot about sort of fake news, and I think that's really, for me, I feel like that's dangerous and problematic. I do think there's such a thing as fake news, but I think a lot of what he's pointing at is just news that's unfavorable towards him, and I think that's tricky. I think that's really tricky, I think all news is biased, but that doesn't mean that it's fake, I think, honestly, I think the other thing, too, that's been interesting, in terms of polarization, is that I think that Fox News, their model is it's a really specific model. And I'm trying to think if they've been around for about 20 years, but I there was something that happened in the world of kind of news reporting that was pretty significant when they came along. And I think for some folks, they feel like not just significant, but potentially problematic in terms of polarization, in terms of trying to get good information. I don't think they're the only, I don't think they're the only folks that do that, but I think that they kind of started something. Yeah.
Do you think echo chambers really only exist on digital space, or do you believe it's in?
No, I think it can be anywhere. I just think that I think that the digital world has made a sizable contribution. Did you have a question, or were you just?
I can wait.
What was your question?
Quarter sheets.
Yeah.
Do we have to do those ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, just on Google Docs do, it's not called columns, I think it's called boxes, or it's called,
Okay.
and it'll be a drop-down menu, and it'll have all these like boxes, and you just go 2 by 2, and then put your stuff in there.
Because you mentioned it like once in the beginning and haven't really mentioned it since, and so I forgot we had to do that.
Yeah, just hop on the computer, go for it.
Okay.
It won't take you long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you get stuck, let me know.
And because you do believe that they're in real, do you believe they existed like before the digital age, or is it just like?
Yeah, I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I mean, I think we're always going to gravitate towards, you think about like nationally, even before there was, the internet, like think about an issue like support for the LGBTQ community. You go somewhere like Portland, and Portland's kind of historically been fairly queer friendly, at least comparatively speaking, and you've got kind of that echo chamber, and then you've got other parts of the country where everyone is kind of reinforcing more of a homophobic worldview. So yeah, I don't think you have to have social media for that, but I do think that it's and what we talk about in psychology is that there are some real pros and cons. Like for instance, I'm a part of a Facebook group that's AP psychology teachers, and we echo and we egg each other on to be better teachers. I also think you could be a part of an online group that's a white supremacist group, and you're going to echo and egg each other on to be more racist. So I think you can find, support, but I also think that, in psychology, we talk a lot about using science and really kind of challenging your own views, trying to use data to, if you feel like you've got a strong hypothesis, then, try to poke holes in it, try to figure out what doesn't work with it. We had three students, Owen, Majib, and Kate. They did a project where they surveyed people on their political views, and the way they did it is they had quotes from different politicians, famous politicians, and they asked people first where they were at on the political spectrum, and then they asked them to rate the quotes. And what they did, though, they used some deception. 1/3 of the quotes were correctly attributed. Another third were actually reversed. So you get something that said, Donald Trump, but it was actually something that Barack Obama said. And then 1/3 of the quotes were they didn't have a name on them, so they were just blank. And they definitely found that there were people who they found a big difference. If someone thought Barack Obama had said it, maybe they said, "Oh, I think it's great." And then when they thought Donald Trump had said it, they said, "I think that's garbage."
Yeah.
But it's the same quote. So I think that's interesting too. I think that we tend to want to find our tribe, find our peeps, and kind of hang out in that circle. And from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a fair amount of sense. There's safety in familiarity, but I also think there's some dangers there. I mean, one of the things we talk about in social psychology is that phenomenon that we want to find people who are sort of similar and grouped together. On the one hand, there's safety, and on the other hand, that can lead to war and racism and things like that. So I don't know that it's like inherently good or bad. It's just I think you have to sort of counter the tendency.
So from that, you wouldn't say echo chambers are inherently bad. They're just in between?
Boy, that's a good question. I guess again, it sort of depends. You know, what are you echoing and what are you egging people on to do? If it's, you know, donating blood to the Red Cross, maybe echo chamber is good. If it's people get radicalized online now. Never had any connections to a terrorist organization, but hear about it online. You've got white supremacists who commit terrorist acts who have never been to a meeting of a group or something like that. I think that ultimately, whether they're good or bad, I think that people at least need to have an awareness of them and approach them critically. I think we need to have a sense of who we're hanging out with, both in person and digitally, and ask some tough questions. And I also think one of the things you lose is that I do think that it's easier to lose the humanity of people that don't agree with you when you're not hanging out with those people. Because by and large, I find that people who I have radically different views from, if we go for a cup of coffee, like, they love their kids. Some days they're happy at work and some days they're not. They probably want to lose 5 pounds, Yeah.
And what would you do in just to fix social media to basically bring it away from echo chambers?
Wow, that's a good question. I do not know. I don't know. A lot of people were asking that. I had a lot of friends that were asking that after the last election because I think, there weren't a lot of polls that were predicting that Trump would win. And Portland tends to be fairly left on the political spectrum, and so there were a lot of people that were kind of scratching their heads. And one of the things I heard some people saying was they were just sort of saying, like, I just need to hang out with a greater diversity of people, digitally and in person. And they were saying, I want to try to reach out to some folks in the Midwest and different parts of the country, and try to kind of figure out what their lives are like and what's going on for them. So help yourself. I don't know. I think it's really it's complicated stuff. How do you kind of police the internet, or I feel like even though the internet's been around for a while, in some ways it feels like some of those questions are in their infancy. Privacy questions also, like Europe has taken a really strong stand recently about privacy. The U.S. hasn't. I think we tend to have more of a kind of a free market perspective. So I'm more curious. I don't know that I have strong feelings as much as I'm really curious about what the future holds, what that'll look like. But I definitely think we've got to be critical consumers, and as a teacher, I think we've got to teach students how to be critical consumers, because I don't think, not just students, not just young people, I'm not sure adults realize it either, how much their information is getting sold, how much they're getting marketed to. It's fascinating to see Russian interference through social media in elections globally. I don't know that we can fix all of that stuff, but I think we've got to at least have an awareness of it, and we've got to have a sense of what we're sort of agreeing to and what we're not willing to agree to.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good to chat.
Thank you.
Good luck on the paper.
Yeah.